Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week, joining us from London in the UK is Paula Doon. Hey, Paula. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Paula is an Agile coach with experience in large organization Agile adoption, as well as in coaching product owners. So Paula, that was a short intro. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Yeah, so I became a Scrum Master when I was working in a digital team. And at that time, I was a business analyst. So I was working around product owners and Scrum Masters, but wasn't really sure what they did or how they did it. And after I did that role, I moved divisions. And my first project in that division was to support an Agile coach in transitioning the division to Agile ways of working. So in that role, I then learnt a lot about the bare bones of what a Scrum Master does, how Scrum, Kanban and Agile work, and then helped teach some of the sessions that they were running to teach the wider division about Agile. And then as part of that transition, there became Scrum Master roles available. And so having done quite an in-depth study of the theory, I wanted to put that to the test and put it into practice. So applied and was successful in getting the Scrum Master role. But really the mentorship was really key to that, and finding someone who knew their stuff about Agile, could communicate it very clearly and effectively, and also apply it to this scenario.
So that's an interesting story. I especially like the aspect of you identifying that you wanted to get a proper mentorship relationship going. Did you find it? How did that search go?
So that was by accident more than anything, because I was working with the Agile coach that joined the division to do the transition to Agile. That, I guess, was particularly useful because there was lots of theory to be conveyed, and having so much time with an individual to explain the theory and really critique it and analyze it was a really crucial part of my learning experience, to challenge and question and debate the frameworks around Scrum and Agile. I think before I joined that division, I had spoken to some of the Scrum Masters I'd worked with previously to learn and get their thoughts. And that is something that is really positive about the Scrum Master community, is that people are always really passionate about what they're doing. It kind of goes with the territory. So always more than happy to go for a coffee, recommend someone else to speak to if they're not as knowledgeable about a particular subject. And I think when I've been on the other side of it, interviewing candidates, and people have approached me to say, how can I become a Scrum Master? That is one thing that I'll always try and recommend, is if you can find someone who's doing the job, more than likely they'll be very happy to speak to you, teach you, point you in the right direction in terms of readings, podcasts and books. So yeah, I think that's one thing I'd say to anyone that's aspiring to be a Scrum Master, would be if you can, find someone who's doing the role and ask them for their tips on how they got into it and what they would find useful in an aspiring applicant.
Absolutely. And that's why we're so grateful for you, Paula, to be here doing exactly that, sharing your experience with aspiring Scrum Masters. I very often get approached on YouTube or even, coffee breaks and so on. And people say, hey, I really like the podcast when I was starting. This was really a valuable resource, and it helped me, go through whatever challenges that people face when they are in their learning journey. So definitely find podcasts. There's loads of them out there right now, which is amazing, the age we're in, right? I mean, imagine a few decades back, you would be lucky to have a radio show on any topic you cared for. And these days we have podcasts which help interact and learn from people who have a lot of experience, like you, Paula. So let's dive into that experience. And today, because today is Monday, we talk about some perhaps not so easy experience, but yet very valuable, because it is through the difficult moments as Scrum Masters that we learn and we get better. So Paula, share with us a story of a failure, a story of a moment where you, as a Scrum Master, you did your best, but at that time, as it so often happens, the best just wasn't good enough and you were still learning. And we'll dive into the learnings and the conclusions later, but tell us that story.
Yeah, the most common challenge that I find as a Scrum Master, and one that I really hate dealing with, is trying to convince teams to estimate and limit their capacity. I find is quite common amongst Scrum Masters and teams that ultimately no one wants to tell a team that they can't do it or that they can't do it all in the time frame that they've been given. You really want to be the cheerleader saying, yes, you can do it. Let's pull together. Let's make it happen, particularly because teams are typically involved in delivering a product or a project. So everyone's motivated around the goal. And there are larger versions of this and sprint size versions of this where you're planning with a team, you're suggesting this isn't going to fit in the sprint. What do we want to take out? The team are adamant that it is possible, they are going to do it. And then it gets to the end of the sprint, and unfortunately, that hasn't happened. The team's demotivated, you're demotivated because you're thinking, what I really wanted to do was take things out beforehand and this moment to be a success. But now, potentially due to a lack of persuasion, due to a lack of experience, due to a lack of conveying that to the wider team and the PO, we find ourselves in a position where we can't celebrate the successes as much as we'd like to, because we're still staring at a sprint board that has got uncompleted stories and tasks.
How do you usually those conversations go? Because I mean, I can definitely relate to that, right? Like you're going to, I even have a story, like I was going through the sprint planning and the team was just saying yes, yes, yes to the stories. And then of course at the end they didn't deliver. And I was product owner at that time. And then I asked the team, so, you know, you guys took 8 stories to the sprint, you delivered 1. Like it was at some point, it must have been obvious that you couldn't deliver them all, right? And, you know, what drove you to take so much into the sprint? And they said very calmly and very innocently, I thought, we thought you wanted us to. And of course, there's a little bit of that expectation, right? The team expects the product owner wants them to deliver more, and they, of course, want to please, so they want to take on more. But that's my story. How about you, Paula? How do you see those conversations usually go with the teams?
Yeah, there's 2 versions of that I've been thinking of. One is exactly that, which is where there's a miscommunication between what needs to be done and what the team think needs to be done. And that's where, if you've got a product owner in the room that's able to make those decisions, it can become slightly easier. But if you've got a product owner or a stakeholder that isn't so close with the teams, that's where, in a way, it's slightly easier for a Scrum Master because you can deflect that decision or that issue to the decision maker. One thing that I saw in a team was we'd get feedback in a sprint review. The product owner would be coming up with loads of really great suggestions, really interesting builds, big ideas about how to take the product forward. And straight away, that would go on the backlog for the next sprint without checking whether that was the top priority for the next sprint. And that then became something I could work with to say, I've observed that we're taking these ideas and going at them gung-ho, which is fantastic. But again, what we're seeing is that we're not making the progress that we'd like to on a sprint by sprint basis. So how do we think that we can change the dynamic of this relationship to make sure that we are working on the things that are of most value, which is a really kind of typical, if I was doing an interview answer. But for the team, something constructive that I could then do with it was just first demo and then coach them to take stock. And when the product owner did have these ideas, just pause, flash up the backlog and be like, that sounds really, really interesting. But in terms of what it is that we want to do next, where does that sit? And in this team, they were really surprised actually that the product owner, once they saw the list, was like, oh, do you know what? I was really excited about that idea, but it's probably one for next year, way in the future. So just, I think, opening up that conversation to be more constructive rather than debating with the product owner was really helpful to say, we're taking these ideas on board. We're really excited about what we're doing, but to you, where do you think this should go?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually a great point, because once we come up with an idea, and product owners, of course, have the same, we think that's the best idea, right? And that's very normal. Some people call it the shiny object syndrome, right? Like, this is the shiny one, right? Then I want that. But that doesn't necessarily fit with the longer term perspective or vision for the product. That's a great point, and also a great suggestion to have that conversation about priority. So thank you for sharing that, Paula.
Welcome.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests help their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.